Okay, let's dive into something that, well, it really sparks curiosity for so many of us, doesn't it?
Definitely.
You see those incredible ancient sites, the pyramids, these structures, they just seem impossible, those mysterious lines out in the desert, and you just have questions. Like, how on earth did they do that? Who built them?
And those questions, they often lead people down some interesting paths. Paths that suggest maybe, just maybe, conventional history isn't quite the whole story.
Uh-huh.
You start finding theories about, say, advanced lost civilizations or perhaps, well, help from somewhere beyond Earth.
Exactly. And these ideas are just everywhere now, aren't they? Especially with popular shows exploring things that really look like ancient tech or, strange depictions in old art.
They really tap into a deep fascination we seem to have about where we came from, our origins.
Totally. So for this deep dive, we're going to focus right in on that phenomenon. We'll be looking at what's called pseudo-archaeology, and specifically the ancient astronaut hypothesis.
Yeah, and we've gathered quite a bit of material for you, articles, some research papers, even discussions from online forums, actually.
Good.
The idea is to really unpack these specific claims, look at the evidence they point to, try to understand why experts push back so strongly, and also, maybe the most interesting part, explore why these ideas are just so incredibly compelling to us.
Right. Sounds good. All right, let's get started then. So, what is the absolute core idea behind this ancient astronaut hypothesis?
Well, at its heart, it's the belief that prehistoric and ancient human societies didn't develop entirely on their own.
Right.
The idea is that intelligent extraterrestrial life visited Earth, way back, and significantly aided or maybe even kicked off human civilization and technological advancement.
And there are some key figures really tied to popularizing this, aren't there? You've got Eric von Daniken, his book Chariots of the Gods was absolutely massive. What was his main angle?
Von Daniken, yeah. He looked at ancient art, artifacts, structures really all over the world, and argued that they depicted actual visits by extraterrestrials. He saw things that, to him, looked like space vehicles, strange beings, advanced technology and ancient iconography. He also pointed to similar myths or symbols, even architectural styles, popping up in cultures that were, geographically miles apart.
Suggesting a common origin.
Exactly, a common external influence.
Then there's Zecharia Sitchin, known for the Earth Chronicles.
Yeah.
His take was a bit different, wasn't it? More focused on interpreting ancient texts.
That's right. Sitchin focused heavily on ancient Sumerian and other Middle Eastern texts. He claimed these weren't myths, but actual historical accounts of extraterrestrials.
Well,
He identified the gods in these texts as beings he called the Anunnaki, supposedly from a planet he named Nibiru.
Nibiru, right.
His interpretation was that they came here mainly looking for gold, maybe 400,000 years ago, and when the mining got too tough, they supposedly genetically engineered early humans to do the work for them.
Wow. Okay.
He thought they were involved in human affairs right up until some major global cataclysms, maybe around 12,000 years ago, which made them leave.
And this planet Nibiru.
Well, yeah, that's a key point. Modern astronomy hasn't found any evidence for a planet like Nibiru. And importantly, academic experts in ancient languages, like Sumerian, widely criticize Sitchin's translations. They say they're just not consistent with established ancient dictionaries or grammar.
So his readings are disputed by the specialists.
Heavily disputed, yes.
And more recently, you see figures like Graham Hancock, especially with shows like Ancient Apocalypse. His focus seems more on a lost advanced human civilization, right? Wow. Wiped out by a cataclysm.
Yes, that's often his primary focus, but his theories frequently touch upon or kind of intertwine with the idea of some sort of non-human knowledge transfer or influence predating known history. So there's overlap.
Gotcha. So those are some of the big names and the general claims. Now let's dig into the actual evidence they present and crucially, how that same stuff is viewed by, academic experts, archaeologists, historians based on the sources we've got.
Right. Let's do that.
Okay, let's unpack some of these famous examples. The helicopter hieroglyphs at Abydos in Egypt. They come up constantly. People look at that carving and say, look, a helicopter. A submarine.
Right, and you can see why it is a really striking visual resemblance, especially if you're sort of primed to look for modern shapes. But our sources, the Egyptologists, they explain that this carving is actually the result of something called palimpsest.
Palimpsest?
Yeah, basically an older inscription was plastered over, and then a new inscription was carved on top of the plaster. Over time, bits of that plaster have fallen away.
Wow.
So what you're seeing are parts of the original carving showing through from underneath the new one. This accidental overlay of two different inscriptions just happens to create shapes that, taken out of context, look a bit like modern vehicles.
So it's like seeing shapes in clouds, almost, but with carvings.
Exactly. When you look at it within the full context of Egyptian hieroglyphs and the actual inscriptions there, the meaning is apparently quite clear and, well, pretty mundane, actually, not helicopters.
Okay, that makes sense. Chance overlay. Another really famous one is the sarcophagus lid of the Maya ruler Pakal the Great at Palenque. Von Daniken saw an astronaut at controls.
And again, it's an incredibly detailed, complex carving. So, it does lend itself to different interpretations if you aren't familiar with Maya iconography.
Right.
But the Mayanist experts, they explain that if you interpret the imagery based on established Maya mythology and symbolism, it's clearly Pakal the Great. He's shown descending into the underworld at the moment of death, and he's aligned with the world tree.
The world tree.
Yeah, it's a central concept in Maya cosmology, connecting the different realms, the heavens, the earth, the underworld. What von Daniken saw as controls and a breathing apparatus. Experts say those are symbolic elements of the world tree itself, and Pakal's own royal and religious symbols, all within that specific mythological context.
And there are actual glyphs, too, right?
Exactly. The glyphs right there on the lid explicitly name Pakal and describe his death and transition. No mention of space travel.
Okay. Then there are the Nazca lines in Peru. Just these bafflingly huge drawings in the desert. I mean, I can see why someone might look at them and think you'd have to be in the air to even make these.
Von Daniken definitely pushed that idea, didn't he? Instructions from aircraft or even runways?
They are truly spectacular, no doubt about it. But archaeologists who study the Nazca culture, they primarily interpret these figures and lines as ceremonial pathways. Probably used in religious rituals, maybe connected to asking for water or fertility.
Ritual pathways. Interesting.
And it's worth noting, as one source points out, von Daniken himself actually admitted later on that, well, maybe the lines could have been laid out on the ground. From a small model, using coordinate systems, you wouldn't strictly need aircraft.
Oh, okay.
And importantly, the archaeologists who first really studied them extensively and brought them to world attention, Toribio Mejia Zespe, he actually noticed them first from a slightly higher plateau nearby, not from a plane.
Oh, yeah. So while seeing the whole figure is obviously easiest from the air, they weren't only visible or understandable from way up high.
Got it. And then there's the whole area of using biblical texts to support these theories. This seems like a really big source for proponents.
Oh, it really is. They pull from all over the place. For instance, the Book of Enoch, not canonical for most, but influential. It describes the Watchers, right? These angels who supposedly came down, bred with humans.
Like creating the Nephilim giants.
Exactly. And teaching forbidden knowledge like metalworking, astrology. Ancient astronaut theorists look at that and say, see, that's a memory of extraterrestrials arriving, messing with human genetics, giving us technology.
Or like the story in Genesis 19, the angels visiting Lot before Sodom gets destroyed. I've heard people say that was astronauts using, atomic weapons or something.
Yes, that interpretation is definitely out there, but probably the most famous biblical example they use is Ezekiel's vision, chapter 1.
Ah, the wheels.
Yeah, where he describes seeing these 4 living creatures and a wheel intersecting a wheel coming down from a fiery cloud. Proponents, including von Daniken and even a NASA engineer back in the day, Josef Blumberch.
A NASA engineer?
Yeah, he wrote a whole book analyzing it from an engineering perspective. They interpret this incredibly symbolic, prophetic vision as Ezekiel literally witnessing a landing spacecraft or maybe multiple ships.
Wow. Okay. And they pull in other biblical things too, right? Like the Ark of the Covenant as some kind of device or God himself being an ET.
Absolutely. They really cast a wide net.
Yeah.
Reinterpreting miracles, divine objects like the Ark or the Urim and Thummim as evidence of high technology or alien intervention. People like Robert Dion, Paul Misraki were doing this back in the 60s, looking at the Bible through that technological lens.
Okay, shifting gears completely now. I've also seen claims about medieval and Renaissance paintings supposedly showing UFOs, like little flying saucers tucked away in religious art.
Ah, yes, that's another common one, where proponents identify something they see as an anomaly in the sky. They point to, say, an oval shape in the background of the Madonna con Bambino e San Giovannino, or a swirling object in Carlo Crivelli's Annunziazione, or that sphere thing in Bonaventura Salimbeni's Santissima Trinita.
Right. Or I think there's one by Marcellino da Panicale, Miracolo della Ne, with multiple objects that look like a fleet.
Exactly. But art historians like Diego Quogui, who studied this extensively, they've documented pretty thoroughly that these objects are consistently identifiable religious symbols within the context of art from that period.
So not UFOs.
Not according to art historians. That oval shape, it's a radiant cloud signifying divine presence, very common. The object in Crivelli's painting, it's interpreted as a vortex of angels delivering the divine message. Salimbeni's sphere. That's a Sphera Mundi, a globe representing creation held by God and Christ.
And the fleet in the snow miracle painting.
Just clouds. Specifically lenticular clouds, which are natural phenomena that can look lens-shaped or disc-shaped, totally consistent with a painting depicting a miraculous snowfall. So these interpretations fit perfectly within, the established understanding of the art and its time period. You don't need to invoke aliens.
It really sounds like it boils down to understanding the symbolism of the time versus just imposing a modern idea onto an old image.
Precisely. That's a recurring theme. Okay, yeah. Finally, let's touch on the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan.
Right, the underwater structure looks kind of like stepped pyramids.
Exactly. It's often cited because it appears to have sharp angles, regular formations, and it's estimated to be really old, maybe over 10,000 years, which would predate large-scale architecture as we generally know it.
And proponents like Graham Hancock argue those features look too regular, too structured to be purely natural. They suggest intelligent design, maybe a lost civilization, maybe aliens.
And that's exactly where the debate lies. While proponents see clear signs of, deliberate cutting and shaping, many experts in geology and marine archaeology argue it's fundamentally a natural rock formation.
Natural. Even with the sharp angles.
They argue it's been significantly shaped by things like tectonic activity. It's a seismically active area and just millennia of erosion from sea currents. The recent public discussion between Graham Hancock and archaeologist Flint Dibble really highlighted this difference, didn't it? Looking at the exact same structure and seeing either compelling evidence of intelligent work or a really remarkable example of what natural forces can do.
So, yeah, across these examples, we're seeing a pattern, right?
Mm-hmm.
Proponents spot something that looks anomalous or is maybe difficult to explain at first glance. They offer an extraordinary interpretation.
Usually involving aliens or a lost supercivilization.
And then experts come in with explanations grounded in the specific historical, cultural, or scientific context of the thing itself.
Exactly, and that leads us directly into why academic experts pretty much collectively categorize these ancient astronaut theories and related claims under the umbrella term pseudo-archaeology.
Okay, so what exactly does that term mean, pseudo-archaeology?
It basically refers to interpretations about the past that are developed and presented outside of, and often in direct opposition to, the established methods and findings of the scientific community, professional archaeologists and historians. It evolved from older terms like cult archaeology or fantastic archaeology.
What's the core criticism from that academic perspective, based on our sources? Why call it pseudo?
The fundamental issue, and this comes up again and again in the sources, is really one of methodology.
How they do the work.
Exactly. Academic archaeology uses rigorous, systematic methods. Things like careful excavation, various dating techniques, analyzing context, forming testable hypotheses, subjecting findings to peer review, and building understanding based on cumulative evidence over time.
Right, the scientific process.
Pseudo-archaeology, in contrast, typically lacks that systematic approach. It often seems to start with the conclusion already decided, like aliens built this pyramid, or there was a lost civilization here, and then works backward.
Looking for evidence to fit the theory.
Precisely. Cherry-picking specific details that seem to support the idea while ignoring contradictory evidence or the broader context. It's a classic case of confirmation bias. They're generally not adding new data through systematic investigation. They're reinterpreting existing finds, often in an unscientific way, to fit that pre-existing belief. And our sources do note that in some cases, the evidence presented by figures like Hancock has actually been shown to be misleading or even fabricated.
Wow. And the way these ideas get presented in popular media, like TV shows, seems almost designed to bypass that kind of critical thinking.
Oh, absolutely. As one source points out, these popular shows use really effective tools. Exciting narratives, dramatic music, stunning visuals, a narrator with a compelling voice. It all makes the claims feel plausible, even exciting. It can feel like an information overload, too. Rapidly mixing known facts with speculation or outright misinterpretation in a way that's really hard for a viewer to untangle in real time. Someone called it fire hosing.
Fire hosing.
Yeah, like you're just being blasted with claims, one after another, without any real chance to stop and critically evaluate each one.
And there often seems to be this deliberate effort to paint mainstream academics in a negative light, too.
Yes, that's a very common theme. Proponents often position themselves as these brave outsiders, humble journalists or independent researchers, just challenging a stuffy, closed-minded academic establishment.
Right.
They'll frame academics as being extremely defensive, arrogant, and patronizing, supposedly terrified of evidence that would call into question everything they have told us. This narrative paints the proponents as courageous truth seekers fighting against some dogmatic institution, which, can be really appealing if you're already skeptical of established authority.
He makes them seem like underdogs.
Exactly. And one source links this directly to a wider trend we see today, a sort of general denial of expertise across various fields.
It sounds a bit like they're using that logical fallacy.
Yeah.
Claiming that because experts disagree with them, they must be onto something big.
Precisely. It's often called the Galileo Gambit.
Yes.
The argument goes, they laughed at Galileo, but he was right. They disagree with me, therefore I must also be right. The obvious flaw, of course, is that just because experts disagree with you doesn't automatically make you right. As an expert quoted in one source dryly puts it, most of the time, if all the experts think you're wrong, it probably just means, well, you're wrong.
Right.
You need more than just opposition to make your case. You need solid evidence and sound methodology.
And is it just difficult for academics to effectively counter this stuff in the public sphere?
Yeah.
It seems like the pseudo-archaeology shows are way more popular.
The sources suggest it's incredibly difficult, yeah. Academic work is often dense, it's nuanced, it definitely lacks the flashy presentation of a hit TV show, and trying to engage directly can feel, frustrating, like trying to have a logical debate with someone who maybe doesn't accept the basic rules of evidence, or who might just pivot to attacking your motives instead of discussing the actual data. As one historian apparently said, trying to argue can feel pointless because you're just not playing the same game.
Okay, so moving beyond the methods, what are some of the broader concerns about the impact of these theories, as raised in the sources we looked at?
Well, a major concern is the legitimacy these ideas gain simply by being platformed on channels that people associate with factual programming.
Like the History Channel effect.
Exactly. When shows like Ancient Aliens air on the History Channel, which many viewers, still associate with educational documentaries, it gives those theories an undeserved air of credibility. There's been a shift in television from pure documentaries to what they call factual entertainment. These shows use documentary conventions, dramatic narration, interviews with experts, often the proponents themselves, and it blurs the lines. It makes it harder for the public to tell what's well-supported history versus what's just speculation or misinterpretation. It basically leverages the channel's historical brand.
It's like using the familiar format of, say, Pawn Stars, where you get little educational bits, but applying it to a narrative where the core claims aren't actually based on solid evidence.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. It uses that familiar, trustworthy format to present this mix of fact and fiction, making the whole package feel authoritative, even when it's fundamentally flawed.
And there's also a strong point made in the sources about how these theories can diminish actual human accomplishment.
This is a really significant ethical concern for many critics. The sources argue that attributing incredible feats, building the pyramids, carving the Nazca lines, constructing complex cities like Teotihuacan, attributing those to aliens or some lost super civilization, basically invalidates the accomplishments of the most intelligent species in the history of the planet.
It takes away the credit from the actual people.
Exactly. It removes the agency, the ingenuity, the generations of hard-won knowledge of the ancient peoples who actually designed and built these incredible things. It can contribute to an erosion of belief in what humans, working together over time, are actually capable of achieving.
And I saw one source describe it as kind of substituting conspiracy theories for the real work and value of studying history.
Yes, one critic called it intellectual empty calories. It might give you a temporary buzz of excitement, this idea of a hidden truth, but it leaves you without any genuine historical understanding, like getting the mental equivalent of rotten teeth and diabetes. And academics often share anecdotes about encountering people, students even, who've completely absorbed these narratives. People who genuinely believe that mainstream history is hiding the truth and that archaeologists or historians are either clueless dupes or actually part of some grand conspiracy or cover-up.
There's also a pretty serious critique regarding potential bias, even racism, embedded in some of these theories, isn't there?
Yes, this is a point raised quite forcefully by critics in several sources. The argument is that ancient astronaut theories tend to disproportionately focus on the impressive achievements of non-European cultures. Think ancient Egypt, the Maya, the Inca, various cultures in Africa and Asia.
Right.
Critics argue the underlying implication, whether intended or not, often seems to be that these non-European peoples couldn't possibly have achieved these remarkable things on their own. They must have had external help, maybe from aliens.
Whereas European achievements.
Exactly. Meanwhile, equally complex or impressive achievements by European cultures like Roman aqueducts or Greek philosophy are usually just attributed to straightforward human ingenuity. So this selective focus is seen by some critics as potentially belittling pre-modern non-white cultures by denying them full credit for their own innovations and hard work.
And some sources connect this to even deeper, more problematic issues.
Yes, one source goes further, arguing that this type of pseudo-archaeology can, sometimes unintentionally perhaps, end up serving narratives associated with white supremacy, racialized nationalism, colonialism, and the dispossession and oppression of indigenous peoples. Basically, by stripping non-Western and indigenous peoples of their own historical achievements and agency.
That's a heavy charge.
It is. And while proponents might occasionally apply theories to European sites too, like Stonehenge, critics argue the consistent emphasis on non-Western sites makes this critique particularly important for many scholars to raise.
It sounds like maybe fundamentally a core issue across many examples is just mistaking correlation or maybe just superficial resemblance for actual causation?
Absolutely. That seems to be a classic pitfall here. You notice that two things look vaguely similar or happen roughly around the same time, and you jump to the conclusion that one caused the other, or that they're linked by some hidden factor like aliens, without providing any actual evidence or mechanism for that connection.
Taking things out of context.
Exactly. Taking artifacts or sites out of their original cultural and historical context and just imposing modern interpretations or these grand external narratives onto them.
Okay. So we've gone through the claims, the so-called evidence, the pretty strong expert critiques, and these broader potential negative impacts.
Yes.
But, I mean, these ideas are clearly incredibly popular. Why? Why are they so compelling? What's the psychological draw here?
That is a really fascinating question, isn't it? And our sources, including one specifically looking at the psychology of mystery, offer some interesting insights.
Okay.
Part of it is simply that mysteries, by their nature, trigger curiosity. They create what psychologists call an information gap.
An information gap.
Yeah, like a sense of cognitive deprivation. Your brain feels like there's a missing piece, and it really, really wants to fill it in. It creates an urge to find the answer.
That feeling of, I just need to know what happened.
Exactly that. And these ideas are almost always presented as gripping narratives, as stories. Stories are inherently engaging, right? They have a flow. And these particular stories offer twists and surprises that challenge your existing understanding of history, which can feel, well, thrilling.
It shakes things up.
It does. And there's also the potential for that aha or epiphany moment, that feeling that you're getting close to figuring out some hidden truth that everyone else has missed. That's a very compelling feeling.
Yeah, let's be honest. Some of the ideas just sound cool and mysterious, don't they? Aliens visiting ancient Egypt, lost underwater cities.
They absolutely do. As one expert we read recalled his own youthful excitement reading von Däniken, there's a definite intuitive appeal. It taps into a sense of wonder, a fascination with the unknown that's just inherently exciting for many people.
Is there also something about how our brains are wired? Like we're always looking for patterns.
Yes, that seems to play a significant role too. There's a well-known human tendency called apophenia.
Apophenia.
Yeah, it's our inclination to see meaningful connections or patterns in random or unrelated data. Think seeing faces in clouds or finding significance in coincidences.
Okay.
These shows often present disparate facts or images or artifacts from totally different times and places, and they encourage you, the viewer, to connect them into this larger pattern that supports the ancient alien hypothesis, even if those connections aren't actually supported by any real historical or archaeological links.
So this show kind of helps you connect dots that maybe shouldn't be connected.
You could put it that way, yeah. It facilitates that pattern-seeking tendency. And cognitive biases can certainly play a part too. As a philosophical source we looked at suggests, if you want a particular outcome to be true, maybe you just like the idea of ancient mysteries or hidden knowledge or the romance of alien visitors, that desire can unconsciously bias how you evaluate the evidence you're shown.
So you might overlook weak points if it leads to an exciting conclusion.
You might be less critical, yeah.
Yeah.
Less likely to scrutinize evidence that supports a conclusion you already find appealing or exciting.
It feels like it connects to something deeper than just, arguing about historical facts.
I think so. Some sources suggest it taps into a really fundamental human fascination with the mystery at the core of our being. Questions about our own origins, our place in the vast universe, the things we don't understand about consciousness or existence itself. These grand external mysteries about ancient aliens might resonate with that deeper internal sense of the unknown.
That makes a lot of sense. So, okay, it's clear these theories are complex. You've got fascinating claims, very strong critiques, and this powerful psychological hook. Given all of that, how can we, as listeners who encounter these provocative ideas everywhere, how can we engage with them in a more informed, maybe more critical way?
Yeah, that's the practical question, isn't it? One key takeaway from the sources, especially from experts like Timothy Caulfield, is the importance of self-awareness when you're consuming this kind of material.
Self-awareness. How so?
He advises, read your own emotions constantly. Be aware if the material seems to be playing specifically to your anger, maybe anger at perceived elites, or your desire to feel special for knowing a hidden truth, or your hopes for something extraordinary, or even your fear of being lied to by authorities.
So notice if your buttons are being pushed.
Exactly. Recognizing that emotional engagement is really the first step towards gaining some critical distance.
And then just maintaining a healthy dose of skepticism, I suppose.
Absolutely. View or read any provocative material, especially claims that promise to completely overturn established knowledge, with a critical eye. Don't just accept extraordinary claims without asking about the evidence, the sources, the methods used to reach those conclusions.
The discussions we saw on those online forums also seem to highlight that since these popular narratives are so widespread and often don't get direct academic counter-arguments in the same big, flashy venues, well, it puts more responsibility on us, the audience, to develop our own critical thinking skills.
Exactly. It really underscores the need for individuals to understand, at least basically, how reliable evidence is evaluated in different fields, how conclusions are actually reached in legitimate disciplines like archaeology and history. And, frankly, it also suggests that academics probably need to find better, more engaging ways to share not just their findings, but their methods and the genuinely compelling stories they do uncover with the broader public.
So it really comes down to being an active, questioning consumer of information, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Not just passively soaking up whatever's presented, no matter how exciting or well-produced it is.
Precisely. Ask yourself questions. What's the actual source of this claim? What's the methodology behind it? Is this person an expert in the relevant field? What evidence is being presented? And just as importantly, what evidence might be being ignored or downplayed? What are the alternative, more conventional explanations? And how well do they actually fit the known facts?
This has been a really fascinating deep dive into a topic that's, well, it's captivating, but also clearly quite controversial. We've explored the core claims of the ancient astronaut hypothesis, looked at some famous examples proponents use and how experts tend to interpret them very differently.
Yeah, and we've dug into the fundamental critiques from the academic world regarding methodology, the lack of rigorous evidence, and those broader concerns about the potential negative impacts, things like diminishing real human accomplishments, and the troubling concerns about inherent bias.
And we've also touched on those powerful psychological reasons. These ideas just grab hold of our imagination, the allure of mystery, the power of narrative, and maybe even our brain's tendency to find patterns everywhere.
It's a potent mix.
It really is. It's a good reminder, I think, that while that allure of the unknown, the desire for extraordinary explanations, is maybe a fundamental part of being human, engaging with ideas that challenge our whole understanding of the past really requires careful consideration.
Critical thought.
Yeah, critical thought and an awareness of how narratives can be constructed, especially when they tap so effectively into our desire for excitement or hidden truths.
And perhaps a final thought for you, the listener, to just sort of ponder. How does our collective fascination with the idea that ancient humanity needed external advanced help, whether it's from aliens or some lost super civilization, how does that maybe influence how we view human potential and human accomplishment today? What might we be missing, and maybe what credit are we unintentionally withholding from our actual ancestors when we leap so quickly to these extraordinary explanations instead of perhaps appreciating the often painstaking, incremental, but ultimately incredible story of human ingenuity, creativity, and resilience over millennia?